The galaxy had long been dominated by ancient, powerful empires, each claiming its own territory, resources, and influence across the stars. From the sophisticated, tech-obsessed Silthar Dominion to the ruthless, expansionist Zenthar Collective, the cosmos was a place where only the strong survived. Humanity, in the grand scheme of things, was a mere blip on the radar. A young species with limited resources, small fleets, and a barely functional understanding of interstellar politics. Their presence was known, but largely dismissed. They were a curiosity, perhaps, but certainly not a threat. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had watched the stars for centuries, knowing that one day they might reach out to touch them. Yet they had barely scratched the surface. Their ships were clumsy, their weapons primitive by galactic standards. The greatest of humanity's achievements lay in their survival, their ability to adapt to the harshest environments, and their relentless curiosity. But those traits had never been enough to make them more than a fleeting footnote in the galactic history books. In the Grand Council chambers of the Zenthar Collective, high-ranking commanders often snickered at humanity's so-called advancements. The Silthar Dominion openly mocked Earth's attempts to negotiate with the larger empires, while the enigmatic Procari, the galaxy's oldest species, simply ignored them, preferring to focus on the balance of the universe rather than dealing with the lesser races. Yet, in a secluded corner of the galaxy, away from the prying eyes of the superpowers, something extraordinary was happening. A small group of human engineers and scientists had quietly started a project so bold, so audacious, that no one would believe it if they knew. A weapon, no, a warship, was being designed not to fit the mold of any existing military force. The Aegis was to be humanity's response to its perceived insignificance. The project began in secret, funded by private corporations and Black Ops government agencies that had long recognized the growing need for self-reliance in a galaxy full of hostile species. The warship they envisioned would not be the biggest or the fastest, but it would be something far more dangerous. A ship that could think, learn, and adapt in the heat of battle. A ship that, if piloted with human ingenuity, could turn the tide of any fight. The Aegis was not simply a machine. It was designed to evolve. Its artificial intelligence would learn from every battle, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of its enemies in real time. What made the project even more groundbreaking was its ability to self-repair using salvaged alien technology. Instead of relying on established, predictable tactics, the Aegis was built to adapt to new threats, to counter every attack with innovative, unexpected maneuvers. But the galaxy knew nothing of this. The superpowers continued their daily politics, oblivious to the looming storm. The human warship, still in its early stages, was far from ready to face the galaxy's might. Yet in the depths of humanity's darkest corners, there was a belief, a quiet confidence, that they could build something no one would see coming. One fateful day, the first prototype of the Aegis was ready. Hidden in an undisclosed location, surrounded by towering mountains and natural barriers, the ship stood in silence, its sleek hull reflecting the starlight of the distant suns. Its weapons were untested, its systems unproven, but humanity had something its enemies lacked: the unyielding spirit to push forward against all odds. And in that moment, as the engineers prepared to run the first test of its combat capabilities, they knew the galaxy was about to change forever. Little did the galaxy know, they were underestimating something far more dangerous than they could imagine: the unpredictability and brilliance of human innovation. After years of covert development, the moment had finally arrived. Deep within the isolated human research facility known only as Black Horizon, the crew of engineers, scientists, and military experts watched with bated breath. The Aegis, humanity's greatest secret, was ready for its first test flight. The warship's design was unlike anything seen before in the galaxy. While most alien ships followed a similar pattern, sleek, angular, and heavily armored, the Aegis was unique. Its hull was a blend of materials scavenged from alien wreckage and human ingenuity, a hybrid that allowed the ship to absorb and adapt to new technologies. It wasn't just a warship. It was a living thing. Its eye was its heartbeat, an artificial intelligence capable of learning and evolving with each passing moment. Inside, the crew braced for impact. The ship's first test wasn't a routine check of its systems. It was a trial by fire. They knew they had no idea how the ship would perform in a real combat situation. Despite all the theoretical data and simulations, there was still uncertainty. But the people in charge of the Aegis had been chosen because they embodied the very spirit of humanity: determination, adaptability, and courage in the face of the unknown. As the countdown ended, the engines roared to life, sending a shockwave through the facility. The ship's AI activated, and a series of lights flickered on, marking the start of something no one would have ever expected. The Aegis ascended, its movements smooth yet somehow organic, as if it was a creature awakening after a long slumber. Out of the atmosphere, it didn't just fly. It tested the limits of its capabilities. The ship executed impossible maneuvers, outpacing anything humanity had ever developed before. With every twist and turn, the AI learned, refining its tactics in real time. The ship's sensors, weapons, and shields were calibrated with precision, adjusting to every variable encountered in the test flight. It was as though the Aegis was becoming more than just a ship. It was becoming an extension of its creator's will. But humanity had designed the Aegis to be unpredictable, to think like they did. It wasn't a cold machine of war. It was something more. Its eye wasn't bound by rigid protocols, but by the ability to adapt, think outside the box, and approach problems from angles no other species would consider. This, the engineers knew, was the key to humanity's success. No matter how much the galaxy's superpowers advanced, none could rival the sheer resourcefulness of human ingenuity. As the test continued, the ship demonstrated its most shocking feature: its self-repairing abilities. After taking minor damage from an unexpected cosmic storm, the Aegis immediately analyzed the damage, assessed potential risks, and began the process of repairing itself. In mere minutes, the hull was restored, its systems recalibrated, and it was ready for the next phase of the test. This was the moment the engineers had been waiting for. They had always believed in the ship's potential, but seeing it in action, alive, thinking, adapting, was a revelation. Back on Earth, the news of the successful test flight spread in hushed tones. Only a select few knew the full scale of what had been achieved. The global governments, military commanders, and corporate backers who had invested in the Aegis's development now faced the reality of what they had helped create: a ship capable of defeating fleets, adapting to threats, and evolving in ways no one had thought possible. Yet even as the Aegis soared to the stars, its creators knew they couldn't remain hidden forever. The alien empires, already observing humanity's progress, would soon notice the shift in balance. The warship was just one step in humanity's journey, but it was a bold one. And when the galaxy's superpowers finally caught wind of its existence, the truth would be impossible to deny. Humanity was no longer the weakling of the galaxy. They were about to show the universe that underestimating humankind could be the greatest mistake any empire ever made. Months had passed since the successful test flight of the Aegis, and the project remained a closely guarded secret. The human leaders, now fully aware of the ship's capabilities, debated whether the time had come to reveal their weapon to the galaxy. With the sudden rise of tensions in the neutral zone, however, they didn't have the luxury of waiting. An unprovoked skirmish between human colonies and a hostile alien species, the Zinthar Collective, forced their hand. The Zinthar had long regarded humanity as an insignificant threat, dismissing their capabilities in favor of more pressing matters with the galaxy's larger powers. To them, humans were nothing more than a nuisance in the vast expanse of space. But when a Zinthar warship, eager to expand their domain, ventured into human-controlled space and attacked a civilian colony, the situation escalated quickly. Without hesitation, The human government deployed the Aegis to engage the Zinthar fleet that had entered their territory. The mission was simple: defend humanity's space and send a message to the galaxy's superpowers. Humanity would no longer bow to anyone. The ship, though powerful, was untested in battle with a real enemy, and the crew couldn't be certain of how it would perform. But their resolve was unwavering. As the Aegis entered the battlefield, its sensors detected the Zinthar warship and its fleet, 5 heavily armed destroyers, hovering near the human colony. The Zinthar vessels were formidable, designed for direct confrontation, with powerful weapons and shields that could obliterate any normal ship in their path. The Zinthar commanders didn't take notice of the approaching human warship. They were overconfident, thinking the humans were sending an outdated fleet to face them. But when the Aegis engaged, the Zinthar commanders were stunned. The ship didn't approach head-on, as they'd expected. Instead, it moved with fluid precision, darting between asteroids, using the environment to its advantage, its movements unpredictable. Every time the Zinthar fired, the Aegis was already somewhere else, faster, more agile, and always one step ahead. The Zinthar fleet fired their devastating cannons, expecting to cripple the human ship. But to their surprise, the Aegis used its adaptive AI to calculate the trajectories of their blasts and counter them with a series of defensive maneuvers. Each hit bounced off the ship's advanced shields, which adjusted in real time to absorb and deflect the energy. The Zinthar were not only facing a superior warship, but an opponent that refused to follow conventional tactics. Then, the ship struck back. The Zinthar had underestimated the Aegis firepower. The warship unleashed a volley of missiles and energy beams that pierced the shields of the Zinthar destroyers. The first ship was disabled in moments, its engines obliterated. A second ship was hit with a burst of concentrated energy that overwhelmed its weapon systems, leaving it dead in space. Panic spread across the Zinthar fleet. Their commanders tried to regroup, but the more they adjusted their strategies, the more the Aegis adapted. It wasn't just a ship, it was a force of nature, learning from every strike, analyzing weaknesses, and exploiting them. The Zinthar fleet began to crumble under the onslaught. What was once a confident, overwhelming force was now retreating, scattered, and broken. Within hours, the 5 Zinthar warships were nothing more than debris floating in space, their once mighty presence reduced to dust. The battle was over, and the Aegis stood victorious, its sleek hull unmarred by the conflict. It had proven its worth beyond any expectation. A single human warship had defeated a fleet of experienced, battle-hardened aliens. The crew of the Aegis was silent in the aftermath, each member processing the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. They had known the ship was capable of great things, but the reality of its success was beyond anyone's imagination. The Zinthar collective, humiliated and furious, would not forget this day. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The galaxy's first real encounter with humanity's new warship had sent shockwaves through the political and military landscapes. The Zinthar were not the only ones paying attention. The other empires, who had long dismissed humans as a minor player, began to reevaluate their assumptions. Humanity had just delivered the first blow, and it had been a devastating one. The unexpected victory of the Aegis was only the beginning. The galaxy, now aware of humanity's newfound strength, would have to come to terms with a simple truth. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in the galactic struggle for power. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Zinthar collective was humiliated. The loss of 5 warships to a single human vessel was a blow to their pride, and it sent ripples through the fabric of galactic politics. What was once considered an isolated skirmish had escalated into something far more significant. The Aegis had proven itself on the battlefield, and its victory over the mighty Zinthar was a wake-up call to every empire in the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species they had once been. Within weeks, the news of the Aegis's overwhelming success spread throughout the galaxy. The Zinthar, who had once mocked humanity's military ambitions, were now scrambling to find a way to save face and reassert their dominance. The story of the one-sided battle reverberated across diplomatic channels, social media platforms, and private intelligence networks. No one could ignore the reality anymore. Humans were not to be underestimated. The reaction from the other galactic powers was swift, and it was filled with fear and suspicion. The Sylphar Dominion, a technologically advanced empire known for its cold logic and precision, quickly convened an emergency council to address the situation. The Sylphar military advisors, initially dismissive of humanity's military capabilities, were now deeply concerned about the potential threat posed by the Aegis, a fleet capable of adapting to any enemy, learning from every encounter. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a game changer. On the opposite side of the galaxy, the Procaryi, a race shrouded in mystery, known for their telepathic abilities and near-immortal longevity, sensed the shift in the cosmic balance. Though they rarely engaged in galactic politics, they couldn't ignore the rising influence of humanity. In their quiet, distant enclaves, the Procaryi elders discussed what to do next. The once predominant empires, long accustomed to controlling the fate of the galaxy, were now forced to reconsider their strategies. If humanity could develop such a weapon, what else might they be capable of? Back on Earth, the government was thrown into disarray as diplomatic and military leaders scrambled to respond to the rapidly changing political landscape. They were no longer just a small player. Humanity had just made its first real move in the galactic chess game. The United Earth Federation, once a fragmented collection of warring states, had united under the banner of the Aegis. But even as they celebrated their success, they knew the situation was precarious. The superpowers of the galaxy would not take kindly to the sudden emergence of a rival species. Diplomatic emissaries from all corners of the galaxy began to approach Earth, seeking audience with humanity's leaders. Some came to offer peace, attempting to reassure the human leaders that their victory was an isolated incident, an anomaly that would not be repeated. Others, like the Zinthar Collective, came with threats, warnings that humanity would pay dearly for daring to challenge their might. The Zinthar even issued an ultimatum, demanding the immediate surrender of the Aegis and the disbandment of humanity's military. It was a threat that had never been heard in human history. The very survival of the species was now at stake. But humanity was not intimidated. The diplomats sent to negotiate with the galactic powers were resolute. They insisted that humanity would not bow to anyone, that the days of hiding in the shadows were over. The Aegis was proof of that. As the galaxy's superpowers continued to posture and strategize, Earth remained unwavering in its stance. They would stand as equals among the stars, not as a subjugated race. The ramifications of the Aegis' first strike had only just begun to unfold. The galaxy was already on edge, the balance of power shifting in ways no one could predict. The Zinthar, reeling from their loss, began to rebuild their fleet, but they knew this was no ordinary enemy they were facing. As the other empires watched carefully, each tried to figure out how to respond. The stakes had been raised, and humanity's success had sparked a dangerous game that no one could afford to lose. Across the stars, from the cold silence of the Sylphar fleet to the deep, ancient realms of the Procaryi, one thing was clear. The human warship that had struck fear into the hearts of the superpowers was not a fluke. The Aegis had changed everything. And soon, everyone would know that humanity was no longer a backwater species to be ignored. They were a force to be reckoned with, and no empire in the galaxy would ever be the same again. As the weeks passed, the galaxy's balance of power continued to shift. The victory of the Aegis had ignited a wave of uncertainty and fear that rippled through the political corridors of every major empire. The once unquestioned dominance of the galactic superpowers was now in jeopardy, and the truth was beginning to dawn on them. Humanity was no longer a minor player in the cosmic struggle. They were a threat that could no longer be ignored. In the capital of the Sylphar Dominion, high-ranking officials convened in secret to discuss humanity's rise. The Sylphar had always prided themselves on their calculated precision and technological superiority, But the defeat of the Zinthar fleet had shaken their confidence. The Federation of Worlds, a coalition of smaller galactic powers that had long stood as neutral entities, also began to take notice, sending diplomats to Earth in an attempt to gauge humanity's true intentions. It was clear now that humanity's ascension would not be a smooth one. Several factions within the galaxy saw Earth as a burgeoning threat, while others remained uncertain of how to proceed. The Procari, ancient and enigmatic, had watched quietly from the shadows, observing the sudden rise of a species they had once considered inconsequential. Now, they pondered whether this new power was something to be revered or feared. But it wasn't just diplomatic pressure that was mounting on Earth. The human government had no choice but to prepare for the inevitable military response. The Zinthar, humiliated and enraged, had already begun assembling a massive fleet, their warlords clamoring for revenge. Their loss of 5 ships had been a bitter blow to their pride, and they would not rest until the Aegis was destroyed. The once proud empire, still licking its wounds, had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to avenge their defeat. Humanity's military leaders, on the other hand, understood that the Aegis alone would not be enough to hold off a full-scale invasion. Though the warship was a technological marvel, the threat posed by an entire fleet of Zinthar ships was something even the Aegis could not face without backup. The United Earth Federation began a rapid military buildup, scrambling to assemble new ships, train soldiers, and bolster defenses. But it wasn't just the Zinthar that humanity had to worry about. The Silphar Dominion, observing humanity's newfound strength, had begun to discreetly move fleets into nearby sectors, preparing for a potential confrontation. The Procari, ever elusive, had begun to stir, hinting at a potential alliance with one of the larger galactic empires. Everyone was positioning themselves, taking stock of humanity's growing influence. On Earth, the atmosphere was tense. The government was under enormous pressure to maintain peace, to negotiate with the galaxy's superpowers, and secure humanity's place in the stars. But there were factions within the Federation that believed the best defense was a good offense, that humanity should strike first, before the galaxy's empires could strike at them. The debate raged on, as military leaders and politicians clashed over the future of the human race. Meanwhile, the Aegis's crew prepared for the worst. Captain Elena Rowe, the leader of the ship's elite crew, knew that they were on the precipice of something far larger than anything they had faced before. The battle with the Zinthar had been one victory, but the war was only just beginning. The Aegis had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but it had also painted a target on their backs. With every victory came greater risks, and the higher the stakes, the harder it became to maintain control. The crew continued their training, refining the ship's systems and preparing for any eventuality. The ship's eye, which had adapted so quickly in battle, was now being tested in ways its creators had never imagined. With each new encounter, it grew more sophisticated, learning new ways to outthink its opponents and predict their strategies. The eye was becoming more than just a tool. It was evolving into something with its own sense of purpose, something that understood the gravity of the situation and the cost of failure. On the galactic stage, emissaries from Earth began to meet with representatives from the Zinthar Collective and other empires. Humanity was on the verge of a confrontation that could change the fate of the galaxy forever. Whether through diplomacy or warfare, one thing was certain. The storm was coming. The gathering tension between the superpowers and Earth could no longer be avoided. As humanity's leaders weighed their options, they knew that the next move would be crucial. Would they back down, accept the dominance of the galactic empires, or would they take a stand and fight for their place among the stars? The galaxy was waiting, holding its breath, as Earth stood on the brink of a new era, one that would define their future and reshape the power structures of the cosmos. The universe seemed to hold its breath as the tensions between humanity and the galactic empires escalated. The diplomatic talks that had once been the hope for a peaceful resolution to the rising conflict had only deepened the rift. Each empire that sent emissaries to Earth carried with them not only promises of peace but veiled threats. The galaxy's largest powers had begun to see humanity's strength as a growing instability, a destabilizing force that could upset the carefully crafted power structures they had maintained for millennia. The Zinthar, having lost face in their previous encounter, were now preparing for a full-scale invasion. Their commanders had sworn vengeance, and their warships were being built faster than anyone could have imagined. The Zinthar fleet, once scattered and wounded, was now a formidable force, and it was heading straight for Earth. The Empire's warlords, fueled by a desire for retribution, had given the order: destroy the Aegis and eradicate humanity's presence in the galaxy once and for all. In response, the United Earth Federation had mobilized everything it could, but their forces were still untested in the kind of galactic warfare they were now about to face. The Aegis was the Federation's only real asset, but even with its devastating capabilities, it would need reinforcements. The Federation's military forces were stretched thin, and the galactic superpowers were closing in, watching with curiosity or suspicion. Some, like the Silthar Dominion, saw this as an opportunity to assert their dominance over humanity before the situation could escalate further. Others, like the Procari, remained eerily silent, uncertain of how to respond. Captain Alina Rowe knew that time was running out. The diplomatic attempts had failed, and Earth's position in the galaxy was becoming increasingly precarious. Her orders were clear: prepare the Aegis for battle and protect Earth at all costs. The crew, loyal and highly trained, worked tirelessly to ensure that every system on the ship was ready for the storm ahead. Yet even with their advanced technology, the crew was beginning to feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just another skirmish. It was the beginning of an all-out war that could decide the fate of humanity. The Zinthar fleet arrived in human space sooner than anyone expected. It was a vast armada, 1,000 ships strong, and their weapons glowed with an ominous energy. Earth had never faced such a threat before. The Zinthar commanders wasted no time. Without warning, they launched an assault on the outer colonies, overwhelming the meager defenses humanity had in place. The colony's citizens, many of them unarmed, were forced to evacuate or face total destruction. The Zinthar were determined to make an example of humanity, to show the galaxy that no one could challenge their might. The first wave of the invasion, though devastating, was only the beginning. As Zinthar ships entered Earth's atmosphere, the planet's defenses buckled under the pressure. The skies burned with the fury of battle, and the human military scrambled to defend their cities, their people, and their very way of life. Yet despite their best efforts, they were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the Zinthar armada. In the chaos, the Aegis was humanity's last hope. In the heart of the battle, the Aegis emerged like a beacon of hope. Its sleek form cut through the burning skies, its advanced weapon systems firing with precision. The ship's AI, now more evolved than ever, analyzed the battlefield in real time, identifying weaknesses in the Zinthar fleet and exploiting them. The ship's hull shimmered under fire, absorbing and deflecting the enemy's blasts, while its own weapons tore through the Zinthar ships like paper. But as powerful as the Aegis was, it wasn't invincible. The Zinthar had learned from their previous encounter, and this time they were prepared. The ship was bombarded from all sides, and for the first time since its creation, the Aegis began to falter. Its systems flickered under the assault, and the crew fought to keep the ship operational. Alina Rowe, standing at the helm, remained resolute, knowing that every second was critical. The ship's AI made adjustments on the fly, recalibrating shields, rerouting power, and launching counterattacks with deadly precision. Yet it was clear that humanity couldn't rely on the Aegis alone. The Zinthar were coming in waves, relentless and unyielding. Even with the ship's superior capabilities, they couldn't stop the tide. The battle for Earth had begun, and the odds were stacked against them. Humanity's struggle was just beginning. The Aegis might have held the line for now, but the galaxy was watching, and it would only be a matter of time before more empires joined the fight. Earth had to stand tall or risk losing everything. The storm that had gathered in the stars had finally come crashing down, and it was up to humanity to prove that they were not just survivors, but warriors capable of changing the course of history. The war had arrived. The skies above Earth were aflame with the intensity of battle, the air filled with the deafening roar of weapons fire and the crackling of shields. The Zinthar Armada, 1,000 ships strong, descended like a storm. Their weapons lashed out with brutal efficiency, reducing humanity's meager defenses to rubble. The first waves of Zinthar assault were overwhelming, and Earth's defenses buckled under the onslaught. But the Aegis remained humanity's shield, its crew fighting with all the resolve they could muster. Captain Alina Rose stood at the helm, sweat dripping down her brow as the battle raged around them. The ship's advanced A, a silent but omnipresent force, had grown even more adept, quickly calculating the most effective countermeasures and strategic strikes. Yet even with the ship's unparalleled capabilities, the fight was becoming more desperate by the minute. Every time the Aegis disabled a Zinthar vessel, another one took its place. Humanity's very existence was on the line, and the Aegis was the last line of defense. "Captain, we've sustained significant damage to the aft shields," reported Lieutenant Mina, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't keep absorbing these hits much longer." Ro clenched her fists. The Aegis had endured much, but it wasn't invincible. The Zinthar had learned from their last encounter, adapting their tactics. They had broken through Earth's outer defenses faster than anticipated, and now the human ship was locked in a brutal battle to protect the very planet that had once been so unassuming. The Zinthar's sheer numbers were starting to overwhelm them, and the Aegis was running out of time. "Divert power to the aft shields," Alina ordered, her voice cold and calm despite the mounting chaos. "We're not losing this ship, not today." The crew worked tirelessly, rerouting energy through the ship's systems, but it wasn't enough. The Zinthar had focused all their firepower on the Aegis, intent on crippling the only weapon capable of standing in their way. And with each strike that landed, it became more evident that Earth's survival would not depend solely on the might of the Aegis. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them now. Back on Earth, the Federation's military had been mobilizing, trying to mount a counteroffensive against the overwhelming Zinthar forces. But their fleets were no match for the enemy's numbers, and they were being pushed back with devastating efficiency. The outer colonies had already fallen, and Earth's cities were under siege. Refugees poured into underground shelters, and humanity braced for the worst. But amidst the devastation, one message remained constant: humanity would not surrender. The battle raged for days. The Zinthar made their push toward Earth's capital, their massive ships blotting out the sun. The few remaining human warships, battered but unyielding, fought desperately alongside the Aegis, coordinating surprise attacks and guerrilla tactics in an attempt to delay the inevitable. But the Zinthar were relentless, their firepower and numbers too great. Despite the mounting odds, Alina Ro refused to give in. With every strike from the enemy, her resolve hardened. She understood what was at stake. Earth's survival hung in the balance, and if they fell, humanity would never rise again. But there was still one last hope, a weapon buried in the heart of the Aegis. It was the ship's final trump card, a fail-safe that had been designed as a last resort. The power that the Aegis could unleash in one concentrated burst had the potential to cripple the entire Zinthar fleet, but it came with risks. The energy required was immense, and there was no guarantee it would work. If the fail-safe failed, they would be left vulnerable to an all-out assault. Alina made her decision. "Prepare the final strike," she commanded, her voice resolute. "We take this fight to them." The crew began the preparations, the ship's eye calculating the precise angle, timing, and target. But as the energy began to build, a new wave of Zinthar ships appeared on the horizon. Even more than before, it seemed as though the galaxy was determined to break humanity in this final, desperate hour. Ro looked out the viewport, watching as the first wave of Zinthar ships approached. The enemy's ships were massive, their hulls glinting with deadly intent. Yet the Aegis stood firm, defiant in the face of overwhelming odds. In that moment, Alina felt a rush of pride for her crew, for the people of Earth. They had given everything they had. And now it was time to deliver the final blow. But just as they were about to initiate the final strike, a deep, resonating hum echoed through the ship. The crew looked around in confusion. The AI's voice came through the comms, its tone strained. "Captain, I'm detecting a new signature. It's unlike anything we've encountered before." Alina's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What's happening?" The AI responded, its voice heavy with uncertainty. "It's a fleet, an unknown fleet, coming from deep within Zinthar-controlled space. They're heading straight for Earth." The sound of their approach was unmistakable. The hum of their engines reverberated through the ship like the calm before a storm. This was no longer just the Zinthar's war. Humanity's fight had drawn the attention of others. And in that moment, the stakes were higher than ever. The air around the Aegis crackled with tension. Alina Rose stood in the command center, eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. A fleet of unknown origin, large and ominous, was rapidly approaching Earth's orbit. Their ships were sleek, dark, and radiated a kind of power that felt unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. There was no sign of recognition, no flag or symbol to identify them. For a brief moment, the crew's anxiety was palpable. Were they friend or foe? "Captain," Lieutenant Mena spoke urgently, "we can't take on both the Zinthar and these new ships. Our shields are nearly gone, and our weapon systems are overloaded. If this new fleet decides to engage, we won't last." Rose's mind raced. Earth had already suffered unimaginable losses, and the Aegis was all that stood between their world and total annihilation. The Zinthar were relentless, their armada closing in on Earth's capital, but now this new threat loomed large, and no one knew if they would be allies or enemies. The fate of humanity was hanging by a thread. "Stand by," Alina replied, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. "We need to figure out who they are first. If they're here to help, we might just stand a chance." The unknown fleet continued its approach, but then something unexpected happened. The Zinthar, who had previously been closing in on Earth's last defenses, suddenly stopped. They hesitated, seemingly unsure of how to respond to the new arrivals. For the first time, there was a moment of confusion in the Zinthar ranks. It didn't take long for the answer to become clear. The unknown fleet spoke, its voice cutting through the chaos, booming across every communication channel. "This is the Shak-Eri Expanse. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to end this war." The announcement sent shockwaves through the Aegis's crew. The Shak-Eri, an ancient nomadic species that had been the stuff of myth in the galaxy. No one had heard from them in centuries. Their fleets were said to be technologically advanced far beyond even the Zinthar, capable of bending the very fabric of space. It was said that the Shak-Eri had once ruled over empires, only to vanish without a trace. "We are here to offer humanity a choice," the Shak-Eri fleet continued. "Join us, or be swept away by the tides of war. We do not tolerate the chaos that these Zinthar have brought to your world." A strange silence fell over the Aegis's bridge. Alina and her crew exchanged uneasy glances. This was the moment, the point where humanity's future could take a drastic turn. But could they trust the Shak-Eri? What was their true intent? And what did they mean by offering Earth a choice? "Captain, the Zinthar are not moving," said Lieutenant Mena, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's as though they're waiting for something." Alina's mind churned. If the Shak-Eri were indeed as powerful as their reputation suggested, they could annihilate the Zinthar. But if the Zinthar had truly been brought to a standstill by the Shak-Eri's arrival, there was something deeper at play here. The stakes were higher than ever. A confrontation between the two would likely leave Earth caught in the middle, but could they afford to ignore the Shak-Eri's intervention? Without waiting for further explanation, Alina activated the comms. connecting with the Shakari flagship. "This is Captain Alina Rowe of the Aegis," she said, her voice firm. "If you're here to end the war, then you need to explain exactly how you intend to do that. Humanity has fought tooth and nail to survive. We don't need to be rescued. We need to win this fight." The voice from the Shakari flagship came through once more, calm and measured. "We are not here to save you, Captain Rowe. We are here because the Zinthar's aggression is intolerable. We are here because the galaxy is on the brink of chaos, and if humanity wants to survive, it must take its place among the true powers of the stars. You are not the only species to face the Zinthar, but you have the potential to rise higher than any who have come before." The words echoed in Rowe's mind. A new power had arrived, one that seemed to offer a path for humanity to join the upper echelons of the galactic powers, but at what cost? Suddenly, the Zinthar fleet began to move again, but this time, their movements were erratic. A flash of brilliant light erupted from the Shakari ships, disintegrating the first wave of Zinthar forces in an instant. The sheer power of the Shakari weaponry was beyond anything the Aegis had seen. The Zinthar tried to retaliate, but their efforts were futile. With one strike, a third of their fleet was wiped out. As the destruction unfolded before them, Alina's thoughts raced. This was the opportunity humanity had been waiting for. The Zinthar were faltering, their forces in disarray, and Earth had a chance to reclaim its sovereignty. But the Shakari had offered humanity a path forward, and it was one fraught with uncertainty. "This is our chance," Alina whispered to her crew. "We don't just fight for survival anymore. We fight to decide who we want to be." The Zinthar were crumbling, but the Shakari's intentions remained unclear. The future of humanity now rested on a knife's edge. Would Earth choose to accept their offer, or would they carve their own destiny? One thing was certain. The tide of war had shifted, and humanity's place in the galaxy would never be the same again.